handmade to me signifies some sense of luxury. And what I've noticed with handmade goods is that they have a value that no two pieces are exactly alike. There was a time where everything used to be handmade, and then the advent of machinery came in and everything was so uniform, and that used to be valued. But now that we've gotten used to that, there's great value in handmade items that are unique, that are handcrafted, and those tiny flaws actually give it its unique value.
Something that is made by the hands, of course, and something that is made with a lot of effort.
Anything that is creatively made with effort, any basic thing that you see around and you make something out of it by your hands is something that's handmade for me.
I think of something extremely personal and something that probably has a lot of care given to it. I do think of artists a lot because I think of someone whose practice is basically using their body to produce something really.
The value of a handmade drawing is so important. It helps me think freely, and since this question is directed towards me, I think it's free flow of thought.
It's only because we won't be able to control what we do without putting in much thought or our own volition. But having said that, I do understand that when one does something repeatedly and repetitively enough, then it might come as second nature, and then you do things that you don't have to think about at all.
An idea comes from your mind, and then there's an emotional connect that you feel like you want to make something out of something that you see. There's effort that's more like an energy from your body that was also coming into action,
When you're doing handwork, you need to have your focus on it. You need to keep your mind in it. An example, if you're drawing a circle, when an artist draws a circle, they just draw it perfectly in the first go. But when someone a common person does it, they might not be able to make a perfect circle. So the artist has the cognitive abilities involved more than the common person.
I guess there is a sort of memory to it, especially if it is some kind of art that's passed down from generation to generation. Sometimes I feel like there's a sense of perception as well. I think I'm thinking a little more about pottery right now because that's something I have a little bit of experience with. I think there's a lot of instinct involved as well.
Of what I've learned, a lot of what we see, our reasoning, our experiences are based in visual cues. How we imbibe these cues do translate into how we think and how we express by actually using hand.
There is embroidery. I would think of that as handiwork that's actually quite elaborate. I don't know if I know a name of that. I know that the embroidery is called chicken for some reason, and I don't know if that answers your question. But when it comes to the actual name of the art, I do not know.
Just thinking of pitwise and the handicraft that goes into that, I think in being able to embroider what you're imagining by hand, being able to paint, well, not on a canvas, but on a piece of cloth, which starts to become a part of interior decor, is something that I've closely been able to work with and see being created by a local Indian craftsman.
So I'm from Telangana, and I think Pochampalli saris are really famous around here. These are handmade saris that are made on some handloom machines or something.
There's pottery that's very famous. That's a very handy craft thing that requires precision. And I really like pottery for me because I think there's a lot of concentration, so that's where your cognitive ability comes in.
I'm thinking of embroidery and stuff. I'm not getting specific names in my I can picture exactly what I'm thinking of, but I cannot remember the name right now. Yeah.
Animals, mostly elephants, tigers, flowers, and if I had to choose my favorite, I would probably go with birds. I know that's not very common, but I do enjoy birds and ducks and tigers also as motifs.
I have to say, like, peacock, first of all, my mom loves. I think a lot about, like, natural motifs, like fish. I see a lot of fish. Calves, of course, because they're auspicious through Hinduism. It's like something I've personally been familiar with. I'd probably go for some kind of a, like, tiger or like a wildcat. I think like those motifs are really beautiful.
The motif of a peacock. The other is the keri pattern. Keri is in mango, so the form of the mango is kind of replicated, multiplied, and given decorative forms is something I really relate to. Mango being my favorite fruit, and what more than having an art form of the fruit.
What I've seen is the chakra, butterfly, or some animal, but my favorite would be peacock because it has always been my favorite bird.
I really can't. I don't think I have any favorites or anything that I can recollect to say that's my favorite.
I don't own very much at this point in my life because I've moved around quite a bit. But there are a few things that I've held on to. One is a blanket that's hand embroidered with a Rajasthani pattern. And I do have a small rectangular piece of cloth that is imprinted or painted on with elephants. And I enjoy looking at it once in a while. It reminds me of, well, I don't know if it has a particular memory associated with it, but I do know that there is this sense of knowing.
So there is this bed which has an antique work on it. So that is very special to me. Even though it is not, even though it's a little broken now, but still it's very special and we have kept it there.
I guess the only thing that's handed down to me from my family would be the culture and traditions.
There's a letter that my grandmother wrote to my grandfather. I can't even remember the date, but it was just a pure form of affection on a piece of paper, a handwritten letter. That's something I think I look forward to, the kind of respect and love that two people can share, and yeah.
A lot of the Indian clothes I own are handed down to me by my mom. And like some of the stuff is like traditional like handicrafts that she learned to make. So those are of course very important to me because it's cool to kind of connect to her in a professional sense in like a form of art.
I have quite a few, many actually. I have a kurta and a set of cufflinks that I'm very fond of because there's an emotional attachment to that from the people who gave it to me. They're like my grandparents. My parents, unfortunately I've changed my body size quite a bit. I used to be very obese, so a lot of my kurtas, I used to have a big collection of kurtas that my family had given me, and I don't get to wear them anymore. But there is a watch. I'm particularly attached to my watch because that was given to me by my father.
I do have a bracelet, silver bracelet that was given to me by my aunt, and also I have boots, and I'm like really attached to my boots.
A mang tika, so it's kind of an accessory which you wear on your head like that. It goes with traditional Indian clothes, and what's interesting is that it's in the pattern of a keri, a mango, and extremely beautiful, handed over to me by my grandmother.
I have a Kerala sari that has a mural painting on it. I think that's like the first one that I got with my own money.
I would have to pick something from my mom that she's like handed down to me. It's this red skirt that has like embroidery over it, and it has these like beautiful like circular patterns all over it with some like mirrors in it, some like sequins in it. It's just really beautiful.
So my association with textiles began when I started doing my master's course in fabric and apparel science. We did a lot of technical studies on textiles, the traditional textiles, the industrial textiles, learned about the fiber, the weave, many different aspects of it, like the art and the art history in traditional textiles. When you're doing a course like that, then you also do make choices as to what field you want to pursue in greater detail. And for me, this decision came from having a lot of these old textiles at home, which belonged to my mother and my grandmother. So chintz from India has been the most popular traded good in the 16th, 17th centuries. And you can see the far-reaching popularity of this fabric by the different names it got in different parts of the world. The word chintz, it derives from chitta, spotted. The same fabric is called pintados in Portuguese, and pintados means painted. The same fabric is called fustian because it was traded from this port called Fustat, which was in Egypt. The same fabric was called a palampor, which was in Palampor was actually palangposh, a bed cover, a palangposh in Hindi. And this fabric was the kalamkari. Kalamkari got all these names because it was traded by the French, the Dutch, the English, the Portuguese, to different parts of the world. You consider it utilitarian, you consider a textile commercial, right? But then in our subcontinent, we've got textiles which have not been made for these reasons. Say, for example, the Bengal Kantha. Bengal Kantha was a textile which was made in the past, especially. It was made out of old, worn out cloth, and this was usually old sari. Many layers of sari were put together. What happened here was that they followed very few codes while doing this. It was an embroidery just done with a running stitch. And say they would all make a central lotus motif, a central medallion, and some tree of life motifs on the corners. But the rest of the field in this embroidery, they would draw from their own imagination. So it could be like an airplane, or a man riding a horse, or different animals, fish. It could be articles of daily use, say a betel nut cracker, or spoons, or anything that you could think of came into this kantha, into the design of this kantha. And what was very interesting was that they did not follow many guidelines. What was important to them was drawn bigger, other things were smaller, and the way they executed them was very interesting. The stitching, the execution and the design was completely left to the embroiderist who was doing it. It was mainly done by women. So this aspect of using textiles again and again, repurposing textiles has remained in our culture. When you're repurposing a textile, when you're giving it a new life, you are just not reusing something new, but you're giving it an elevated purpose. Say, for instance, this cloth has already borne all the hardships, and then it becomes a totem for somebody. It is repurposed. See, it's made into a baby's blanket. So it protects him, or it's made for a daughter's trousseau. And what you see in them, that this flexibility of design, of execution, of telling narratives that comes on these kanthas, they are very clearly, they are very I would say subliminal aspects of art. Ikat is again a textile which is, the textile technique is done in many different parts of India. It's done in Gujarat, it's done in Andhra Pradesh, it's done in Odisha. And what is special about ikat is that you do a resist when the fabric is still being in the yarn form. So it is done pre-weaving, the fabric is resist dyed so that you get selective application of color. And all this is calculated by precision. And you dye, there are ikats where only one set of yarns is done with selective application of color, single ikats, but there are some ikats which both sets of yarns, the long yarn, the length yarn, and the filling yarn, the width yarn, both of them are dyed in precision, pre-weaving. And then when the weaving is done, then all the patterns appear. One special double ikat was the Telia Rumal. Very simply, Telia means oil and a Rumal was a kerchief. And this Telia Rumal in the 17th century was popularly made for the Arab and the African market, where it went as kerchiefs which were used by men to be used as turbans. They wear a turban called a keffieh. Back home in India, these rumals were made into slightly longer lengths, and they were used as loincloths by fishermen when they went out fishing. And it was like a perfect fabric to resist all the salt water damaging their skins. And Telia Rumal is a very fine example of how innovation within a tradition can happen. Even in the present day, you can see Telia Rumals being woven in many parts of Andhra Pradesh. They follow a color combination of red, black, and white, usually in geometric checkered patterns. So it's a very fine example of how innovation has driven these arts in India. And the weavers have constantly been challenged to do something new. So children in the families, they learn the art from a very young age. They apprentice with their parents. There are many different activities. It's still being carried out. You cannot make out what you would give more value to. You know, a Telia Rumal which has been made in the past, or the Telia Rumal which is being made in the present. It's very interesting that we see a lot of motifs that are there in the textiles are rooted to the local area where the textiles are made. In the temple town of Kanjivaram, you see this bird motif called the Anapakshi, and the Anapakshi is there in the sculptures on the temples. It's there in a lot of metal works that are made in the area. And the Anapakshi is a mythological bird, and it denotes purity. And this bird was made popular by the poet Kalidasa in his works Kumar Sambha. A lot of other motifs also from the temple which come onto the Kanjivaram sari. For example, Rudraksh. Rudraksh is also shown in a lot of saris, and also the steepled edges of the temple, they are drawn on the they come in on the borders. There's another motif that you see directly from coming in from the sculptures, and this is a lion motif. And there is this lion motif is very common also in Gujarat. And the lion motifs, it symbolizes power, it symbolizes courage. And you see this lion motif incidentally coming onto some of the religious textiles, which says the name of the deity, Sri Umyaji, which is also woven into the textile on the corner of this is the big lion motif. Another motif that you see very commonly is the Zoroastrian motif of Paisley. It's a Zoroastrian symbol of purity. It's a cypress tree with a lot of blooms and florals around it, and it became very popular in the West. There were shawls made in a town called Paisley in England, and that's why it got its name. That's where it got its name from. In India, we call it by many other different names, like an ambi or a booty. And it's interesting to see how the motifs have not just spread around India, but around the world, having been rooted in India. So textile have not been viewed as arts by the utilitarian purpose that they serve, and but they have been prescribed in many of our traditional systems. You know, you have a family tradition of wearing certain colors or wearing certain technique. A pastoral community from Gujarat, which moves every year 1,000 miles from Gujarat all the way till Andhra Pradesh. They are a goat herding community. They travel with goats, and they make a lot of products out of say goat cheese on their way, and amongst them the women interestingly make a product for themselves, which is a Nara. It's called a Sindhi Nara, and the Sindhi Nara is done in a very ancient technique called the sprang, and it's beautifully decorated with beads on the end. On one end you have this detachable tassel which is made with beads, which to ease its entry through the skirts. Now we have this power of looking at things, at least from the area that you belong to. Short of touching and feeling them, there is all kinds of information available about these products which can be found online. Looking at the different stories of the people who made them, and learning about them, communicating with them, doing very focused travel of exploring the handicraft. You learn a lot about ethnography when you visit people in this way, and that is something which we must all think collectively. If we want them to make an effort to continue with the tradition, we also on our part have to make an effort and connect to the craft as much as we can. And we do these a lot in the museum through exhibitions. We communicate unique things about the textiles. We communicate the technology behind the technique, how it was made. So the more people know about it, the more likely it is to survive in this world.